to meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to order of reference of January 27th, 2021, the committee is meeting to study Bill C-224, an act to amend an act to authorize the making of certain fiscal payments to provinces and to authorize the entry into tax collection agreements with provinces. And we will be meeting on Bill C-208 in this committee meeting as well, and Larry McGuire will present his bill. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format, which we've all become used to, pursuant to the House Order January 25, 2021, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom applications. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and the rest of the formalities we will not go through. So we will start on Mr. St. Gabriel's bill, Bill C-224. So we'll go through the clause by clause consideration, and I hope the people have the bill before them. It's not like we're in Parliament where we can hand it around, but the bill's fairly short bill, so hopefully you got it before you there. So pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of the preamble will be postponed, and I will call for the vote on Clause 1. Clause 1 is got 4 subsections to it. Shall Clause 1 carry? I'd expect you want a recorded division on this, do you, Mr. St. Marie?
À moins que ce soit adopté avec...
Unless it's on division.
Shall Clause 1 carry?
Tout à fait.
Yes.
Vote. Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Derowitz?
Oops, we can't hear you. You're on mute, Julie. You're still on mute.
I know. Sorry, that's rare. Okay, against.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
Against.
Mr. Fraser?
Contre.
Ms. Katrakis?
Against.
Mr. McLeod?
Against.
Mr. Falk?
Abstain.
Ms. Jansen?
Abstain.
Mr. Kelly?
Abstain.
Mr. Fast?
Abstain.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Pour.
Mr. Julian?
Pour.
Yeas pour, 2, nays contre, 5, 5.
Okay, Clause 1 is lost. Shall Clause 2 carry? And it's just one clause related to the government of Quebec. Shall Clause 2 carry? I guess you, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Derowitz?
Against.
Mr. Fragiscatos?
Against.
Mr. Fraser?
Against.
Ms. Katrakis?
Contre.
Mr. McLeod?
Against.
Mr. Falk?
Abstain.
Ms. Jansen?
Abstain.
Mr. Kelly?
Abstain.
Mr. Fast?
Abstain.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
En faveur.
Monsieur Julian?
En faveur.
Yeas pour 2, 2, nays contre, 5, 5.
The clause 2 is lost. Shall the preamble carry? Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Derowitz,
Against.
Mr. Fragiscatos,
Against.
Mr. Fraser,
Against.
Ms. Kotrakis,
Against.
Mr. McLeod,
Against.
Mr. Falk,
Abstain.
Ms. Jansen,
Abstain.
Mr. Kelly,
Abstain.
Mr. Fast,
Abstain.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
En faveur.
Yeas pour 2, 2. Nays contre 5, 5.
The motion is lost, and on the title, and I will have to ask you at some point, Madam Clerk, I've never had a bill defeated at committee, so I'm not certain what we report to the House, but I do think we still have to go through the title, so shall the title carry?
Monsieur le Président, à ma connaissance, on peut
Mr. Chairman, I'm told that a title cannot be defeated at committee, given the constructive behavior of the Conservative and Liberal parties.
Thanks for that advice, Gabriel. That's wise advice.
Mr. Chair, the legislative clerk now.
Right. Okay. If we could hear from you. Yep.
Yeah, the committee can vote on the title.
Committee can vote on the title, but if it, I guess, just for sake of her all, the title can be voted on, but regardless whether it carries or not, how do we handle this bill on reporting to the House if it's defeated? Does the chair just report to the House that the bill has been defeated, or what's the? I never went through this process before. Imagine that.
Yes, there will be a report handled to you, and you will table the report with saying that all the clauses were defeated.
Okay. Then shall so you are saying that we can vote on the bill, on the title, we can vote against or for, contrary to what Mr. St. Marie says?
Yes, you can vote on the title, yeah.
Okay.
Can
All
I
right,
ask a
well,
point of information?
You can.
Can you vote in favor of a title if the whole bill is defeated? This might be for the clerk.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Okay. Then all those in favor, shall the title carry? Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Derowitz,
Can I do an I don't know?
You can abstain.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yep.
I mean, I may disagree with how the voting is going, but I think if Liberals and Conservatives have decided that this bill not go forward, it would be bizarre to have a truncated portion of the bill come forward. The report will have to go to the House, and there will be a debate on the report from this committee. But it seems to me, I mean, having a chunk of a bill that has just been gutted go forward doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Peter. Ms. Zerowitz.
So against.
Mr. Fragiscatos,
Against.
Mr. Fraser,
Against.
Ms. Kotrakis,
Against.
Mr. McLeod,
Against.
Mr. Falk,
Abstain.
Ms. Jansen.
We're voting on the title, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So we for.
Mr. Kelly,
Abstain.
Mr. Fast,
Abstain.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
In favor.
Monsieur Julian.
En faveur.
In favor.
Yeas pour 3, nays contre 5, 5.
The motion is lost. Shall the bill carry? We do have to vote on it in total.
As amended, Mr. Chair.
As is told, shall the bill carry as amended? Thank you, Mr. Legislative Clerk. Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Derowitz,
Against.
Mr. Fragiscatos,
Against.
Mr. Fraser,
Against.
Ms. Katrakis,
Against.
Mr. McLeod,
Against.
Mr. Falk,
Abstain.
Ms. Jansen,
For.
Mr. Kelly,
Abstain.
Mr. Fast,
Abstain.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie,
En faveur.
4.
Julian,
En faveur.
4.
pour 3, nays contre 5, 5.
The motion is lost. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House on division? Okay, we'll go with the vote. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House?
Ms. Derowitz,
Point of order.
Go ahead, Peter. You're on point of order.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I don't believe it's the bill is amended. The bill has been killed. It's
You're right.
but you are reporting the committee's decision to the House, and
Yep.
there will be a debate on that decision.
So I think that can go on division. That he report to the House.
Yeah.
I don't need a recorded vote on that.
Okay, we're okay on division. Okay, and we don't need to order a reprint of the bill. So, okay, we will.
Yes,
order
you
to-
do need a reprint,
do?
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Okay. God, it's a good job you're here. I'm learning some lessons today. Okay, shall the committee order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at the report stage? On division? Okay, I see head shaking. Okay, we'll order a reprint. Thank you, Mr. Legislative Clerk. Okay, that will end the discussion on clause by clause on C224. Thank you for your efforts there, Mr. St. Marie. You wanted to make a point. Thank you, Legislative Clerk, as well. Go ahead, Gabriel.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Wayne. First of all, I'm sorry that I misled you a few minutes ago concerning the vote on the title, but if we have a bit of time before moving on to Mr. McGuire's bill, we could go through the 3 motions that I had presented some time ago, the 4th of February, concerning the proceedings of the committee. But if not, if Mr. McGuire is here, we could do that at another time. I'll leave that to you to decide, Mr. Chairman.
Is here, and we probably should have a subcommittee meeting as soon as possible to try and sort out where we go. We've got quite a few motions, and Peter has issued another one that doesn't get the 48-hour notice, but it is. I think people have got a copy of it. He must have watched W5 or something this Fifth Estate this week. Okay, if we're okay with that, then Mr. Clerk, do you want to give Mr. McGuire a sound test, and then we'll turn to him.
hello, Mr. McGuire. Alexander Roger here. I'm the clerk of the committee, and welcome to the committee. If you could just give us 10 seconds sound test, and we'll check with the interpreters.
Hello, Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here today to appear before the Finance Committee on Bill C-208 and ready to make a presentation and to hear questions on this as well.
Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Chair, we're good to go.
Okay, then pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021, the committee will now start its study on Bill C-208, an act to amend the Income Tax Act, transfer of small business or family farm or fishing corporation. And we'll welcome as a witnesses here the sponsor of the bill, Larry Maguire, MP for Brandon Surrey. Welcome, Mr. Maguire, and the floor is yours. We'll go to you first, and then we'll go to a round of questions. The first two questioners will be Mr. Kelly and Mr. Fragiskatis. Larry, floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Easter, and Wayne. And it's a pleasure to be here today to appear before the committee on Bill C-208. This is a bill to help small businesses. But before I get into that, I just want to thank you as the chair and the committee for meeting today on a constituency week and being able to allow us to bring this important bill forward that many in several industries are supporting across the country. And all parties, from what I understand, have support as well in the opposition, as well as some of the members of Parliament voted for this, of the governing party voted for it in the second reading as well. I'm very pleased to be able to present it today. And I have some other thank yous later on as well. But to start off today, this bill gives us an opportunity to, kind of work together to champion the causes for those whose time has come, I guess you could say. I want to thank as well Mr. Guy Caron from the NDP. He was the former interim leader of the NDP, and this was his bill when it was presented to the House in previous years. And I was able to pick it up because of the draw that comes out of the parliamentary procedure to be able to bring his bill forward word for word, basically, to be able to make sure that there is support to help small businesses qualifying shares, as well as farming businesses and fishing industries as well. So I wanted to thank Mr. Caron particularly in regards to this. The essence of the bill is pretty straightforward. C-208 will allow small businesses, farm families, and fishing corporations the same tax rate when selling their operation to a family member as they would when selling to a third party. So currently, when a person sells their small business to a family member, the difference between the sale price and the original price is considered a dividend. And so this business is, if it's sold to a non-family member, the sale is considered a capital gain. That's pretty straightforward tax. That capital gain is taxed at a lower rate and allows the seller to use the lifetime capital gains exemption. So it's completely unacceptable that it's more financially advantageous to sell for a parent to sell their farm or their small business to an absolute stranger than it is to their own family, to their own children, son or daughter, grandchildren. I want to give two specific examples of how this legislation will help families transfer their operations when they decide to make that transition. I can imagine a bakery which a couple has operated for 30 years. It's the couple's running that bakery and is now ready to retire, and another company has reached out to indicate that it would like to purchase it from them. And however, their daughter has indicated that she wants to take over the family business. And in many cases, these family members have worked in these businesses and helped them survive and be able to proliferate, I guess, and continue as a family business. Like a lot of small business owners and farmers, they couldn't afford to put large sums of money into their RRSPs or savings vehicles, as any extra money is reinvested back into the business. So this couple will rely on the sale of the bakery to fund their retirement plans, and so they call up their accountant to start the conversation about different planning scenarios. The accountant tells them that if they sold their bakery to another company, to the other company, rather than their daughter, they would have an effective tax rate of 10%, effectively using their lifetime capital gains exemption. However, the accountant told them if they sold the bakery to their daughter, they would be obliged to repay their loan with personally taxed dollars. This is a significant penalty compared to selling their bakery to the other company, as it would render, the effective tax rate would be quite a bit higher, significantly higher. So with this information in hand, they have a family huddle and discuss the options. Well, the couple is now seriously considering selling the business to outside the family, as they do not want to burden their daughter with a tax obligation that will inhibit her ability to make a living and grow the business successfully as they've done over the years that they ran it. So on the sale of the shares of the bakery, this couple should be indifferent to selling to their daughter or to the other company in a perfect world, I guess you could say. Their daughter would not be penalized for purchasing shares from the parents and should be able to fund the purchase with corporate funds, as she would if she were to purchase the business from an unrelated party. By making this change, it'll allow the next generation to become business owners and to keep the business locally owned and in the family. So with C208, we can fix this injustice once and for all. Right now, many of our entrepreneurs are struggling, particularly in this pandemic. It's been most disruptive, one of the most disruptive forces in our lifetimes. So across the country, no community is immune from its impact. So those entrepreneurs who are listening to where they're at they can run their own businesses and understand the massive responsibility and stress that comes from being the risk takers. But with the legislation we have before us today, it sends the message to those family-run businesses out there that no longer will it be more financially advantageous to transfer your business or your farm to a stranger than to your own child because of tax purposes. The other example I want to give is a farmer who is set to retire in the next couple of years and is reviewing various succession options. The farmer wants his son to take over. However, he wants fair market value for his farm in order to fund his retirement. So if the third party were to ask the farmer to purchase the shares of his farming company, the purchaser would have the ability to purchase the shares through the corporation. By selling the farm to this third party, it would allow the farmer to use his $1 million farm capital gain exemption on the sale, resulting in a 13.39% effective tax rate. But if the farmer sold his farm to his son, the sale would be recorded as a dividend rather than a capital gain, on which the farmer would pay 47.4% in tax. That's 34% more tax, Mr. Chair. I think we could all agree that this is completely unfair for the tax rate to be significantly higher when the farmer sells his operation to his son rather than a third party, in many cases a complete stranger, as I pointed out before. Bill C208 sends a message of hope to young farmers out there who want to carry on what their parents started. That's something special about being connected to the land and to reap what you sow, as there is in any small business and attachment, not just farming and fishing, Mr. Chair, pardon me. In Manitoba and other provinces, there are century farms to celebrate farm families who maintain continuous production for over 100 years, many of them now over 125 years. And I've attended many of those century farm celebrations, as I'm sure many of my rural colleagues have that are on the committee and in Parliament. And you can tell in the faces of the family members how important that milestone is to them. Farm families face unique pressures in succeeding their operations, including the increasing cost of land and average age of farm operators and capital requirements for those entering the industry. So with the passage of this bill, it'll eliminate the unfair tax rates that make it difficult to keep the farm under family ownership. Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chair, rather, in closing, I just want to also say that I am asking the members of the committee today to consider the importance of making sure that we are able to help small businesses across the country, of all those who have eligible shares, to be able to make sure that they can transfer these operations into the next family. It's not every business that will choose to do that, Mr. Speaker, but this, Mr. Chair, Wayne, I'm sorry about that. I keep calling you the Speaker and give you a different title. but it is quite a significant opportunity for families to be able to invest in their own futures and to be able to make sure with pride that their families can continue to build on what they've put so much of their heart and soul into over their lifetime. So I want to, in closing, just say as well as I've thanked Mr. Caron and yourself for allowing this to go forward today, also Mr. Waugh from Saskatoon Grasswoods there, who has allowed me to be able to do my second hour of second reading in early February, so that we could get to this point with this bill today in the committee meeting. So, with that, I would urge my colleagues on the committee to look at allowing this bill to move forward and back into the House for third reading. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Maguire. I might say that Larry and I actually go back probably about 35 years in the farm movement. Larry on farm issues. I'd also say Guy Caron, for those that don't know, was a member of the Finance Committee for a number of years, and I have or had still have the farm, but it managed to get a century farm and a quarter. So I know all about that. Okay, we'll start rounds of questioning, and we'll start with Mr. Kelly. 6 minutes on to Mr. Fragaskatis.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Maguire. So delightful to have you here as a witness. Could you comment on the urgency of this bill, the timeliness of it, and the imperative to get it brought into law?
Well, we've got 1.1 million small businesses in Canada, and they employ about 8 or 9 million people. And I think that this is a tremendously important opportunity for us to be able to show support as parliamentarians for those small businesses in this country. There's a plethora of organizations that do support the bill. I could get into that later, but there's the importance of getting this forward is not a great burden on the taxation system of the government as far as the revenue goes, and it is an extremely large help to those industries, those businesses out there that are family owned, to be able to compete and stay on the same level as any other business that would purchase their the parent business, if I could put it that way. And so that's a very important reason to move this forward, because those dollars do stay in those local economies.
Okay, so you mentioned that Guy Caron had essentially the same bill in the last Parliament. So that this is not a new idea. This has been around for many past parliaments. Could you comment on just the sheer volume of past study and conversation that has led us up to this moment?
Yes, thanks for that question. It's important as well. Mr. Caron did bring this bill forward subsequent to the tax changes that were coming up in 2017 from the government. And it was very well documented at that time that he had done a lot of research on this. We went back to the Parliamentary Budget Officer as well as the Library of Parliament, and they both indicated that there's no need to really change the bill at all in its present format. That was the advice we received at that through the research that we did on this as well. And we have even spoken to Mr. Caron a number of times through my office to be able to make sure that if there was anything else that he thought we should put into this, and there wasn't, he was very pleased that we were bringing it forward to the House again, because unfortunately he wasn't able to do it because of not returning to Parliament, but also because of the draw. I mentioned that earlier. There's a significant order in which these things come forward, and I was fortunate enough to be in the first tranche of those chosen to put forward a private member's bill, and able to do it at this time.
That's great. So you mentioned that there are a number of stakeholder, we'll call them type organizations that support your bill. Could you name off a few of them and talk about the testimony that we've already got at committee that addressed the issue in your bill?
Well, there's a whole host, as I said, of people that are backing this bill from a lot of the farm organizations, but the Montreal, for example, the Board of Trade of Metropolitan Montreal, Federation of Chambers of Commerce of Quebec, Producteur of the du Quebec, the milk producers of Quebec, as well as the Union Producteur Agricole in Quebec, chicken farmers, grain growers, Canada, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Chambers of Commerce have spoken to me, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and the Agricultural Alliance of New Brunswick, and Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan. The list goes on to the Keystone Agriculture Producers in Manitoba, and the Conference of Life Underwriters in Canada, as well as the Insurance Brokers Association of Canada as well. So there's and there's more than that, Mr. Kelly as well. But I think you get the message that there's a great many people hoping and having put forward a lot of work themselves. Many of them have made pre-budget consultations and recommendations to the government, like the Life Underwriters Association as well, and that is pretty important, I think, because that information is in the government's hands now and has been for 3 or 4 years.
Right. So in other words, this committee has actually heard this recommendation before from public stakeholders, and is incorporated and in fact recommended to Parliament the adoption of what your bill will do. So I think that's important to note that we have heard all this, and it would seem to me, and I'll give you another minute to finish this out, Mr. McGuire, but maybe just even a note to the chair that you know, if nothing significant serious arises from questions today, that we proceed clause by clause today. I mean, we've heard the testimony from witnesses, from expert witnesses already, and I'd like to really see this go forward. So with the time we've got left, about half a minute, Mr. McGuire, if you've got anything else you want to add just about the support that this bill clearly has from the various organizations.
Well, thank you. I've just read off a huge amount of the numbers of organizations across the country that are in support of this right now, from one coast to the other. And I think, you know, the chair mentioned our association as farm leaders goes back 30, 35 years. And I know how important he would feel in regards to this in his own operations, the dairy, potatoes, and that sort of thing that are important to PEI. And I have no problem with going to clause today if that was the case. I think that it's a bill that is deserving of attention across the country, and we have heard from witnesses. Many briefs have been sent in before from these organizations that would be on record, and I would leave it at that for now. I would be quite prepared to do that today.
Okay, with that, we'll go on to Mr. Fragiskatis, followed by Mr. St. Marie. Just to mention some of the witnesses that you've outlined, Mr. McGuire. We do have a meeting scheduled for March 9th, hopefully a 3-hour meeting, of which the Life Underwriters, the CFA, and quite a number of other witnesses are on. So we will hear directly from them, which I think is appropriate before we get to clause by clause. Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I'll say right at the beginning, Mr. Chair, I quite like Mr. Kelly, enjoy working with him as a colleague, but I think he's in a bit of a hurry. I, for one, want to understand the bill more and have some questions that stand out. If there are indeed issues of unfairness facing small businesses, facing, in particular, family farms, fishers as well, certainly I want to know more about them, specifically on this issue of intergenerational transfer. Mr. McGuire, again, thank you for your work on this. It's not an easy thing to put forward a private member's bill, and sounds like, although you have been inspired, if I can put it that way, by Mr. Caro, You've done your own work in this regard, and I don't discount that. But I do have some questions. First of all, the estimated foregone tax revenue, if CO8 passed, do you have that figure?
Yes, the recommendations of the parliamentary budget officer were from 179 to 300 million, and it depends on the number of cases that are of businesses that are transferred in any given year, Peter, as well. And so those are the numbers. I know that there were numbers that were projected by the government in the past, but that were 10 times that, but they're certainly not relevant to any of the groups that are making presentations here, and from the parliamentary budget officer as well. Those are the numbers that they came up with, and certainly it's been backed up by many of the organizations.
Which figure do you think is more dependable in terms of the number of transfers that would take place a year? That's quite a range that's suggested.
Well, in regards to the scope of 2.2 billion that was talked about once, it's a fraction of that. It's like 10%, as I've just finished mentioning, and it's been estimated that about a third of like not even every farm or fishers organization or small business with qualifying shares would be sold in this manner. Many of them are sold at arm's length to third parties, but there is a fraction, and in the agriculture industry it's probably a little bit higher, but they're talking about a third would probably be sold in that area, and those are some of the estimates that would come forward. And so the dollar values depend, as I said, on how few or how many would be in that particular year. Maybe because of COVID there might be extra numbers being sold at a time like this, or in better times many of them would want to sell to their families as well. So that is a range, and it's fairly narrow in the budget of the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. I think that the intent, the spirit behind the bill is a good one. That's why I'm genuinely interested in learning more about consequences. But unintended consequences is something that I worry about here too. In your view, does C208 perhaps open the door to tax avoidance practices? I'm thinking, for example, of it allowing an individual to avoid tax on the sale of shares to a sibling by selling those shares through a holding corporation. That's just one example that perhaps stands out here as a consequence if the bill went ahead.
We've looked at the direct sale between family members, and most of those there has to actually be a transaction. It's not a situation where the older generation can afford to fund it for their children. There has to be a transaction take place, and there are safeguards built into this bill that would allow for those transactions to be not just deemed transactions, but actual transactions where dollars would have to flow from one generation to the next. And as I said in my presentation, most of the families that are involved in these operations have built it up with their own blood and sweat and tears, I guess you could say, into a successful business, and are quite proud to be able to hand it into the hands of their children through a financial transaction that will allow the parents, the older generation, to be able to fund their retirement packages, as I said, fund their home, move their home, get into whatever they want to do in their retirement, and so then it's a transition that both sides of the family are proud of.
Thank you very much. I don't have much time left. Certainly recognize Mr. McGuire, as I know you do. I think all members of this committee recognize the hard work that family-owned businesses embrace. It's not an easy thing. I come from a family that was only able to put food on the table because of our work in running a small business, in that case a restaurant. But whether it's a farm or a restaurant, this is a real thing. Final question is, with respect to the private members bill that's been put forward, one might say that it only provides relief for the transfers from one corporation to another, multi-tier corporate structures, for example. perhaps this won't directly assist transfers from parents to their kids. Are you mindful of that? Do you have a view on that?
Yes, and I have spoken to people that have dealt extensively in farm transfers and intergenerational transfers, and they believe that this tax burden that could be placed on the next generation, as opposed to selling it to a complete stranger, is just unacceptable. So, coming from the small business background that you just mentioned yourself, I think you can see if it was 2 or 3%, it might be negotiable, but at 34 and higher percentages, there's quite a difference between the dividend and being able to utilize the capital gains exemption.
Okay, thank you both. Turning to Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian. Gabriel?
Oui,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. McGuire. First of all, I really want to say that I am extremely happy with your bill, that you would have tabled this in the House and passed second reading in the House and find itself here now before committee. It's something I care very much about, as is the case for my other colleagues in the Bloc Québécois. I'd like to ask a few questions in order to illustrate and give concrete examples of what your bill would do. But first of all, I'd like to make a few comments. First of all, the committee, I think, largely agrees with your bill, but what they're trying to do, well, we asked in our pre-budget consultation report, recommendation 117, we asked the government to do this. And so the committee, I think, agrees in the majority with your bill, which is wonderful. Also, and this is a good example, Quebec for several years has set this up, which is to say promote the transfer of businesses to family members. This has been set up in the province, and all the questions that we might legitimately ask, such as those raised by Mr. Fragiskatos, well, in the end, we realize that, for example, to pay less tax, there are safeguards that are easily set up in order to avoid that. So it works well, and it's extremely important. So yes, I remember Mr. Caron had tabled this bill, and I tip my hat to him, and my colleague Mr. Barcelou-Duval had done so also. And if you recall, a few years ago, there was a Liberal member, Mr. Emmanuel Dubourg, for whom I have the greatest respect, who tabled a similar bill to yours. So this is a bill that has support from all sides. So I'd like to ask you, for someone who has a farm and wants to sell the farm to their child, what does your bill concretely change for that person? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the member from Joliet for his presentation in the House at second reading when we did this as well, and for his support for the bill. It demonstrably changes the opportunity for the next generation to be able to continue in the same business as their parents. And one that the younger generation has 99% of the time probably worked in themselves for, let's just say, less than minimum wage as they grew up, and but became trained in their business by doing that, and take pride in being able to continue with something that their parents have put their blood, sweat, and tears, as I said earlier, into. So this bill it definitely changes the playing field to make it completely level, to be able to sell to your own family as opposed to a complete stranger, by allowing the family to be able to use the capital gains exemption as opposed to a dividend on those shares.
Oui, exactement.
Exactly, and that's even more important for agricultural businesses, because the capitalization of these businesses is very high. It takes a great deal of money to make $1 of profit. But it's also the case for small and medium-sized businesses in general. As I said in the speech that you referred to, at the end of the street here, there's a business called Québec Son. So it they are having a lot of trouble because they work on sound for shows, and it's a beautiful family business, and they're having a great deal of difficulty because of the pandemic. The father is asking himself now if he should sell to a stranger and ensure that I have a comfortable retirement, or should I sell to my boy and make sure that the business continues on in the family? And then I just forget about having as comfortable a retirement as I might have had. So could you comment on that?
Well, yes. I mean, I say the pride that I speak of earlier doesn't matter whether it's a farm, a fishing operation, or the business that you're talking about down the street. I think that that the parents have put a lot of energy into it and a lot back into their communities. And I think that's something that we got to take into consideration here as well. Those small businesses always contribute to their communities wherever they can. And to be able to continue with that continuity in whether it's in a large city or in a small community is very important in regards to the scale that they contribute to volunteerism and with their own finances to be able to support other things in those communities as well, other events, and whether it's in the arts, whether it's in sporting events through their churches and other areas as well. There's a great deal of pride taken in those businesses, and the parents in their retirement want to be able to continue to contribute in that. They may even have more time to do it, but they still need to be able to have the resources to do it. And throughout their lifetime, they've probably tied the resources up into the business. Whereas perhaps in other circumstances, those dollars would have went into RRSPs or other savings venues. And so I think it's very important.
We will have to move on. We'll come back 2.5 minutes a little later there, Gabriel. Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Falk.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. McGuire, for being here at Finance today, and thank you for presenting the bill that Guy Caron worked so assiduously on. And certainly, I'm sure Mr. Caron is listening in. He's very much continues to be interested in parliamentary work. So I'm sure he'd be very, very proud of your presentation on behalf of the bill today. Of course, so we supported it to get to committee. This is an important discussion that needs to be held, and you've, I think, put very eloquently the fact that it's a penalty right now, a huge penalty for intergenerational transfers, whether we're talking about small businesses or farms. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. So my first question is, if you're aware of any other country on earth that penalizes small business transfer within the same family and penalizes the transfer of farms within the same family, because my experience with public policy is virtually every country I'm familiar with actually tries to provide incentives to ensure that it can be transferred and that family farms can be maintained and family community businesses can be maintained.
No, I don't, Peter. To answer your question, I don't know of any other country that does this, but I'm not a tax expert in those areas. But I do have, through my farm leadership, as I pointed out with the chair of your committee earlier, I'm sure he had this experience as well. From the mid 80s on, we've been able to deal with some of our counterparts across the line and to the south. And if you want to talk about the penalties that families would face in this versus the incentives that you spoke of in the U.S. Farm Bill from 1986, I just happened to be in Kansas when it came in, there is no comparison. And so I just want to put that on the record as well, that we need to do, as you have pointed out, I think bring justice back to these small businesses that do provide so much employment across this country. 80% of our small businesses create something like 9 million people working for them in this country. So it's a huge undertaking at times. And when you get into, there are other stressful times that happen throughout our history. But during this COVID times, I think it has really put an extra stress on those businesses. So the timing of bringing this in and having it enacted now would be a big benefit to family businesses across this whole country. And there are, as I say, 1.1 million small businesses in the country. Not all family run, but a great many of them are.
Thank you for that. Now, do you have any estimates about what the percentage could be if we eliminate the penalties, basically put it on a level playing field? And I know you've spoken about the estimates in terms of the actual cost of the taxpayer, but over the period of half a decade or a decade, how many more family businesses would be maintained in the same family and family farms maintained in the same family than if the bill was rejected and we continued to have the status quo? Do you know? Have you seen any figures that would show the difference eliminating these penalties would actually mean for community businesses and for family farms?
Well, I know that from some of this work that we've seen, 75% of the businesses of small business owners have already indicated that they would transfer their businesses to the next generation over the next 10 years. And it's estimated that 50% of those owners wish to succeed those businesses to their own family members. So those are the numbers that I think are most important to encouraging to get this bill put forward so that they don't be penalized, as you pointed out in your first question, Mr. Julian, to be able to make sure that they can continue with those businesses in those communities. We're seeing businesses close their doors right now in some parts of Canada, and it's more because of COVID than markets or those sorts of things right now, other than those markets have been taken away because of COVID. But I think that those are pretty significant numbers, and there's in the trillions of dollars worth of businesses there that would be transferred in assets, still very small compared to the large business sector that we have in our country, but very important that if we can keep 50% of those transfers into the family businesses, I think it would be an exceptional bit of success for Canada to be able to do that.
A quick one, Peter.
Mr. Fragoskatos raised, I think, a legitimate question, whether or not this bill could be used as basically a tax dodge. Do you have any concerns about that, Mr. McGuire? Do you feel that there are any weak points within the bill that may lead to that?
Well, I think part of the reason that I was proud to be able to bring this bill forward was one of your former colleagues, Mr. Caron, built some safeguards into this bill. And those shares that are being transferred to the next generation outside of a death occurring have got to stay in that next generation's hands for 5 years, or else the taxation is completely reversed and those taxes have to go back and be paid. And when you've got a 34% difference in tax, that's a substantial amount of funding that I don't know if either side of that equation would be able to just dip into whatever they might think they had for funds and be able to come up with that. So there are safeguards built into this, and while there may never be a tax program that comes forward that is 100% without some new generation of accountants trying to find a way to get around it, I would say that this is pretty much a safeguard for these particular kinds of transactions.
Thank you both. Then going to a 5-minute round, Mr. Falk first, followed by Ms. Zerowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Mr. McGuire's got an excellent bill that he's presenting, but Mrs. Jansen is going to be speaking to it. Thank you.
We will have time. Okay, go ahead, and then we'll come back to you, Ted. Ms. Jansen, you're on first then.
Okay, thank you. So this bill appears to be very timely from the perspective of a COVID recovery plan, since we know that our small businesses will be paramount in helping us get our economy back on track when we finally reopen. And we all know that family businesses are the lifeblood of our economy and our communities. So honestly, I can't wrap my mind around why the government continues to punish parents and children for being willing to put their blood, sweat, and tears into a small business, only to be considered tax cheats by the Liberals simply for wanting to pass it on to the next generation. Now, you mentioned the hypothetical story of a couple who owns a business in a small town. They want to retire. They rely on the funds of the sale for their retirement fund. And this sort of thing happens all the time. Now, in your example, the couple were hoping to retire, sell the business to one of their daughters. She's been working with them for years. She's all excited to take over from her parents, continue building on their legacy. And in the meantime, they get approached by a larger non-related company, which has no local ties. So this larger corp will want to produce the goods in a bigger urban center where they are based, possibly even overseas. Ultimately, this means completely shifting jobs out of the local community. As you mentioned, when you do the math with your accountant, it would cost up to 67% more in taxes for your child to buy compared to a stranger, simply because they're your son or daughter. It makes no sense that we don't have a level playing field here, especially considering how much communities gain from family farms and businesses that are run by successive generations. So since it's clear that a robust COVID-19 recovery will need healthy small businesses that are owned and operated by passionate local entrepreneurs, it's clear that your bill will make a huge difference for local family-run businesses who want to keep that work in their family. So I'm wondering, since this bill is so critical for small family-owned businesses, how many people have actually opposed the bill?
Well, I thank you for that question. I haven't heard of any that have opposed it, other than some of the Liberal members that didn't vote for it on second reading, which was the majority of the governing party. But there were a few members of the Liberal Party that did vote for it. There were others who had indicated to me that they liked the bill, and just because of party affiliations didn't vote for it. But I think that there's a great deal of recognition that this is something that's needed to be able to support our small businesses in Canada. And I want to make sure that it's not just farmers and fishers that are involved here. It could be the local grocery store and the corner store, a shoe store, a hardware in a small community, or a competing one in a major city. And I think that those are the types of businesses that will be put on a level playing field here. It's not that they're getting any great incentive. It's just that they're being put on a level playing field and taking away that penalty that Mr. Julian referred to in his question, and providing a level playing field. I think there may be a misconception here that someone's getting a huge benefit out of this, but it is just putting people back on a level playing field. And so we have had with the plethora of organizations that I read off to you there that are supporting this bill, there is very little argument from anyone to be able to move forward with this.
Okay, so thank you. And you mentioned CFIB. I know prior to the pandemic, the CFIB data indicated that almost 3/4 of business owners are planning to exit their business within the next 10 years. You mentioned that. And it represents 1.5 trillion worth of assets that's going to be transferred to a new generation of entrepreneurs. So of those planning to exit the businesses, apparently almost half of small business owners want to have their children take over. So how will your bill encourage the sale of family businesses to a family member?
Well, it's the tax difference between accounting the dividend or the surplus from the sale over the original purchase price as a dividend versus being allowed to use the capital gains. And it's that 34% that I talked about as a difference. That's such a significant amount that it penalizes family members to not be able to do that. I failed to mention the Chicken Farmers of Canada, I think, in the organizations that I was talking about before as well. And, I was on farm organizations for years dealing with changes in Canadian agriculture situations with people from Quebec on the Union Producteur Agricole, and made some great friends while we were working on those things. But it doesn't matter what sector of Canada you live in today. This is whether you're running greenhouse operations in some of your local area there in southern British Columbia, or down along Lake Erie here in Ontario, or any other types of small businesses in the communities that are supported by a lot of these businesses. It's the taxation rate here that is the significant issue that we want to just be able to make sure that those businesses are on the level playing field with their competitors.
You are at a time, Tamara, but are you complete of your questions, or do you have another one? Go ahead. Okay. Ms. Sirowitz?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Mr. McGuire for being here today. And I want to say congratulations on your success in bringing forward your private members bill to this committee. I agree that if there's an issue, if there's things we can improve in terms of facilitating transfers of small businesses to the next generation, then we should be looking at it. I don't agree with my colleague, Mr. Kelly, though. I don't think that we have heard from experts. I do think we want to be hearing from experts, because as we move forward, we want to make sure that the decisions we make is the best decisions based on the best information that we have. So the questions I have for you, Mr. McGuire, is just, some of the concerns that might have been raised, and I'd love to get your thoughts on a number of things. The first thing I'd love to get your thoughts on is around your proposed amendment to Section 84.1. One of the key concerns that's been raised is that your proposed change would unfairly benefit wealthy individuals instead of other people. So whether it's, middle class farmers or fishermen. So that is one of the concerns that's been raised. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond the way I did in the House, that this is these are family operations, and in most cases, not extremely wealthy operations. They're using the retirement, the funds that the next generation would be able to generate for that value for that business to be able to fund their own retirement. It's not like they're going to be going in and starting another completely, building a mansion or something like that. I guess you could say after the retirement takes place, it's to fund their retirement. And anything that we can do to put people on a level playing field, I think, regardless of their income in those areas, is something that would benefit those families to be able to do it. When complete strangers can do it, there's very little, there's unanimity practically across the country to make sure that they're treated in the same manner. We know that 84.1 is set to be able to make sure that there is not stripping of funds from the tax system, or that there's loopholes there. And as I said in reply to Mr. Julian's questions, there are safeguards built into this bill that would allow to, take care of any situations that may arise in being able to just fund these off into the and then sell them outright and benefit those individuals. So I think it's a legitimate question. I thank you for it, but this bill is all about putting people back on a level playing field.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. McGuire. And since you mentioned the surplus stripping, I'll maybe sort of ask my next question on that. My understanding is that your private members bill would facilitate surplus stripping using an individual's lifetime capital gains exemption without ensuring that a genuine intergenerational share transfer has occurred. So with C208 as proposed, after selling shares of a transferred corporation to a purchaser corporation owned by their child, could a parent immediately purchase the shares of the purchaser corporation from their child?
Not that I know of, because of the clause that we've got in there, that if they tried to do something like that, they do have to go back and pay the percentage of tax that was deemed to be there in the first place, the benefit, if you will. And so once you've run a business for 5 years, that seemed to be a relevant, or a very relevant amount of time by the research that we did to be able to say that the transaction is obviously legitimate at that time. If it was sold back before that period of time, and there was as you say, a false benefit there, or a deemed benefit, then there would be a penalty in place.
Okay, appreciate it. And I have one more question. I know that there's always a concern around artificial tax planning. And so my question to you is, what guardrails have you proposed in this bill to ensure the differentiation between genuine transfers in artificial planning.
Well, I think I just answered that in regards to the 5-year clause
5-year.
that's been put in there, that sort of thing as well. And it's more to be able to make sure that people are on a level playing field. And I just have to keep reiterating that the playing field needs to be level for these people to be able to keep the type of business that they've built in the same family. Now, that isn't to say that the next generation won't take that business and do something completely different with it, or add to it, or expand it. But most times they will keep it going in their own local area as well. And that's one of the big benefits to this, is whether that small business is in your hometown or my hometown, or a rural area or a coastal fishing village, the benefits stay in those communities because those businesses will continue to operate on the same soil or in the same turf that they've been on for a generation already. And hopefully the generations down the road, if this is to continue in that regard. And as I say, for the benefit that would be attained from these small businesses being able to put on a level playing field and have these funds, that it's not like they're all going to go in a huge saving account. They're going to continue to purchase items in their communities, and those dollars will stay there, and they'll stay in those local communities as well.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you both. Then we'll turn to the 2.5-minute rounds with Mr. St. Marie, followed by Mr. Julian, and then we'll be back to you, Mr. Falk, if you want in. Mr. St. Marie.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Easter. Mr. McGuire, could you come back to the statistics that you spoke of earlier? You perhaps already mentioned them, but I'd like to hear the statistics that you have in hand again. How many family businesses there are, how could many could be positively affected by this bill, and so on. The last comments that you were making, that a business that remains in its community spends in its community. And we know that one single business that remains active in the community makes a huge difference to it. So I'd like to hear you on those statistics once again, please.
Well, it's not every small business that has a succession plan. They work really hard to be able to move it forward. I talked earlier about 75% of small businesses owners have already or intend to exit their business between 2018 and 2028. We've only got 7 of those years left. 50% of those business owners wish to succeed their businesses to a family member on the sale or the transfer of it. Finding a suitable buyer is a main issue for a lot of families, and I think there's another issue here as well. I've seen it in agriculture that there are, traditionally when I was growing up, it was always the male sector that came back into the farming operation. That has changed dynamically today to a lot more young women are coming back from university degrees or taking over the family farm businesses, fishers, and many other small businesses, I might add. And I think that one of the advantages here is that we would be helping female entrepreneurship stay in the family by doing this and making it more accessible. I think there's only a few years ago, there was only 16% of small businesses and 29% of farms that were majority owned by women. So I think that anything we can do to enhance both sectors, both sexes, to be able to stay, genders, to be able to stay in those operations, it certainly puts everyone on a level playing field. And I think that's just another part of the equalization that this bill brings to the table for succession planning.
Go ahead, Gabriel.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. And I have a few cases in my riding where the farm is taken over by women. I'm thinking of Madame Parent and Madame Perrault, and these are lovely stories. So I hope that the bill moves forward to encourage next generations taking over the farms. And I'll wind up with a story I might ask you for a comment on. The Minister of Finance for the province of Quebec, Mr. Girard, came and made a presentation before the Chamber of Commerce of Joliette, and we talked about the importance of this next generation of farmers, and he didn't understand the importance at all of this bill that we're trying to move forward here in Ottawa for the province of Quebec. And there's the whole issue of unpaid taxes and all, but those kinds of problems I think we can solve. So why is Ottawa not moving forward with this? I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Well, I think that there's been a couple of comments, in reply to my own presentation in the House at second reading. There was, and Ms. Zerkowitz brought this up a little bit. There seems to be a worry here that some wealthy person's going to find a loophole to get through from avoid paying some kind of taxes. Well, that's not what this is set up for. And it is set up as an equalization to support small businesses. I guess I just say that someone who brings that to the table from your community of Joliette probably should go and talk to the Board of Trade of the Metropolitan Montreal, because they are in support of this bill. And so are chambers of commerces across this country in regards to the types of business entrepreneurship that they see in their communities. I know right here in Brandon, Manitoba, there's so many businesses run by families and family operations that it would be quite significant. And I look around the small communities, the smaller communities that I have lived in throughout my life, and it is the same there. And I think that, while there's many of the family members will go away and get an education in agriculture, in commerce, in engineering, in many fields, human resources, they will end up coming back to those small businesses with that education and training and be able to enhance it even more. So thank you for that question.
Thank you both, Mr. Julian, followed by Mr. Falk, and then Mr. Fraser. Peter?
You're on mute. Or you're
mute, Peter.
There we go. I was thanking you, Mr. Chair, and thanking Mr. Maguire for being here and saying that we are having a good discussion. I'd like to take it a little bit away from the subject of the bill itself, Mr. Maguire, given your agricultural background, to talk about the importance of food security and food sovereignty, that essentially having family farms often is really the foundation for local community economies and regional economies. And it means a family farm means responding to the needs of the community in a way that a farm that is purchased by an offshore corporation can't fulfill. And often we see offshore corporations looking exclusively for export crops rather than providing the essentials for the community or for the region. So I guess I wanted to ask you, given your experience, whether you think this bill contributes to having the family farm as that foundation for food security, for food sovereignty, and how important is that when you look at other pillars of agriculture, like supply management? How important is that for Canada's future to have a secure basis, a foundation for family farms?
I think the continuity is tremendously important, Mr. Julian. I see the little flag over your right shoulder. The same with Mr. Easter and many others in these in the gallery screen that we have here today. Coming to this as a farm leader from across Canada, I know how respected Canadian food products are in the world. They know that we produce some of the best food, if not the best food in the world, the best quality food in the world, the safest food in the world. And you don't get that from not having your heart and soul into the operation. There's many things that can take place for contamination and a number of other things. And the generational transfers of being able to keep this continuity that I spoke of in the forefront really is what the rest of the world is watching, to make sure that we are producing food that can be exported as top quality food in the world and compete with anybody in the world. And that's why we've always been able to That's why our export markets are so important, and the transportation of our goods is so important. But it really is that is a very important question that you raise, and I thank you for that, because when you get away from it, the continuity of being able to make sure that the generation coming up knows why they're doing the things that they are on those operations, particularly in agriculture and probably in our fishing industry as well. And I would even say, it doesn't matter if you're making shoes, the quality that you're making is, you want it replicated in the next generation so that you can continue to have that the people that are buying your product will have the confidence in that purchase.
Okay, we will have to move on. Mr. Falk, just before you come in, just because it relates to that discussion that you just had, Larry, and we tend to talk about money and the difference in the taxation selling out of the family. But there's another aspect to this in a community, and that is, I guess, coming from the heart, the pride of ownership. We're seeing, especially in the West, I think more and more absentee landowners, if I could call it that. So if the bill, what would you have to say? What could you argue in the case of a community? Will the bill do anything if its intended purpose is met? Would it do anything in terms of, I guess, number one, instilling pride in your operation that you're fourth, fifth, sixth generation, holding people in the community that and especially relates, I guess, to the farm sector? What would you have to say along those lines? What would be the benefits beyond the saved dollars? And I guess second to that, how much pressure is on, and I've seen this, where a parent or the son or daughter wanting to buy the operation, they don't think they can, because they can't give their parents a good enough retirement if they get it at the price that they would have to get it at in order to survive. So that's another aspect. How much pressure is there on both generations in terms of the transfer to not purchase because of the disadvantage of the taxation system? So those two questions, and then we'll go to Ed.
To answer your last one, there's a huge pressure there, Wayne, not to be able to give it to the next generation. There's a huge tax and disincentive there to go back to the dollars. But your first point is tremendous. You live in a part of the country where you have 6 and 7 generations. Out here on the prairies, we might be getting close to that, but we're not quite there yet. Or at least you've had many more generations on the East Coast than we have, or in Ontario or other parts of Canada. But that continuity is so tremendous. And to answer your question, it's the heart of many communities. It's what keeps them going. If you are selling this to, we have had many successful foreign purchases of farms in Canada or small businesses because those people come and become part of those communities. But if there's an offshore purchase through a multi type of corporation who just rents the land out to people that are don't have the same investiture in the success of it, many times we've seen that fail. And I think that it is so important to be able to make sure that we still allow that sort of foreign land to be purchased, because you don't want to restrict the families when they're selling these businesses, same as any small business. But when you and I use the shoe store example, whether it's a farm or not, you're using the farm examples. I think it's very, very important that we provide them with every opportunity to be able to have that continuity that I spoke of in Mr. Julian's question, not just for the small community, or for the exports, but tremendously for the local region.
Okay, thank you. Turning to 5-minute rounds again, Mr. Falk, followed by Mr. Fraser. Ted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great questions, Mr. Chair. You know, there's lots of dynamics involved when there's a family farm sale or a family fishing corporation sale or a small business share sale, especially when it involves intergenerational transfers of those farms, corporations, or small businesses. And I think those are the things that need to be considered as part of this bill as well, because this bill is seeking to take away the inequities that currently exist in our tax structure when a sale is made to a family member. Those inequities shouldn't exist. There should be a level playing field when a business or a farm or a fishing corporation is transferred intergenerationally to a family member. And Mr. McGuire, you've talked a little bit about the safeguards that you've built into this bill, and you've also acknowledged and credited some of our previous parliamentarians for initially bringing a similar bill to Parliament as well. So I think the recognition is there that we need this bill to create a level playing field for folks that are considering selling their small business or farms. Because, you know, for the most part, a lot of families have socked away their equity, their retirement savings plans inside of their businesses. They've kept those corporations running efficiently and effectively, and they've actually been very prudent with their own expenditure of personal finances to make sure that the corporations are well funded to succeed. And then when it's time to sell the business, they're looking at whether or not to sell it to a family member or whether they're going to sell it to an outside individual or entity. And they're looking at the tax consequence, and they're seeing their retirement fund is now a matter of question in making that decision. And it should never be a matter of a retirement fund or taxes that inform the decision of whether it's going to be sold to a family member or to an outside party. And, you know, some of the other dynamics is that it's also much easier to keep a family unified by providing fairness in the transition as well. And if parents have to make an allowance of having to pay additional taxes to sell it to their children, do you think that creates stress with inside families, Mr. McGuire?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I definitely know that it does. If you're trying to, I know of cases where the family actually had to make the decision not to sell it to their own family. And it was probably one of the hardest decisions that they've ever had to make in their lives. Just because they didn't think that the next generation could carry the burden of the taxation that was going to be put in place, and they couldn't afford to lose the benefit of the lifetime capital gains exemption, which, by the way, was put in place years ago and has been expanded. So the successive governments know that that is a very good tool to be able to help small businesses. There's no doubt about that. But making sure that it's there to support, as you say, the communities, and never mind just the next generation. It is a big benefit to be able to make these transfers to the next generation, and I think it's important to look at the mix of those that are coming back and taking it now through the gender equality that's taking place in all of our industries today, and the diversification that takes place in there. And I think we need to continue to put bills like this in place to be able to make sure that those entities are able to succeed and be a part of their communities and raise their families in the same way that they were raised. And I know it puts a lot of stress on those families in intergenerational transfers if they can't do that, and they have to look at this taxation thing as the reason why it doesn't happen.
You know, Mr. McGuire, often in times of these intergenerational transfers, one child ends up with the farm or the family business, and the parents are seized with the decision of how they can equitably treat the other family members, the other siblings. And if their taxes are going to be such that that the residual that they're left with after the sale to a family member causes them to not be able to be fair to the other children, what do you think that does to the family and the community, and how would those ripple effects be realized?
That's a good question, Ted. Thanks. Not every one of the siblings is going to want to be involved in that operation. So, there has to be an equitable arrangement made with, and most families look at it this way anyway, that they want to make an equitable arrangement with the sale of their business to maybe have something to provide for those who are not parts of their direct sale in the business as well. And I don't know if I think that's what you were looking at. And I feel that it's very important that part of that transition that takes place in those businesses doesn't lead to further family misunderstandings, I guess, if you could put it that way.
Correct. Yeah, that was a dynamic. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. If you got another question, go ahead, Ted.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say that was my observation as well, that often the disparity that would be caused by increased taxation due to selling to a family member just ripples on to the distribution to other siblings as well in a transaction like that. And I think your bill, the first principle is tax fairness, whether it's no matter who it's sold to, but the other is it's actually a real benefit to families to be able to equitably distribute the residual sale of either a farm or a small business. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. McGuire shaking his head yes on
well,
that one.
Yeah, no, I think I answered that question in the previous one, Mr. Chair, but I thank Mr. Falk for bringing that forward. It is an important point.
Okay, Mr. Fraser, who will be followed by Mr. Fast, and then Ms. Katrakis. Mr. Sean.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Mr. McGuire. I don't think we've had a chance to get to know each other as well as I'd like, but I will say from your comments in the House and what I've seen, you seem like a very genuine person who's come to politics for all the right reasons. And I appreciate what the bill is trying to do. I think there is certainly some good that could come from it. I do have a couple of reservations about either things that the bill doesn't do or perhaps unintended consequences that could stem from the bill. And I'll sort of focus my comments on those issues. The first sort of bucket of objections comes from the fact that it's tied to the intergenerational transfer of companies, not all small businesses. I know fishing operations and farms in particular, our attention is drawn to them. Of course, it's not limited to those industries. I got a huge inshore lobster fishery in my own community. Some of the businesses are owned by corporations, but a significant number are owned personally. And I may be mistaken, but I'm just wondering if your bill does anything to assist the intergenerational sale of personally owned businesses in the fishery or in agriculture.
Well, I thank you for that question, Mr. Fraser. I've been called a lot of things, but I take it as a compliment that genuine would be one of them. So thank you. This bill does nothing to stop the direct sale from family members that aren't in corporations. The benefits are still there that they can use in those direct sales, and so it's probably even simpler for them to be able to do it. But this is a circumstance for those small business qualifying shares to be able to put them back on a level playing field.
So look, I guess there's two inequities that I observe. I think one, which your bill is trying to tackle, is the fact that you really should be able to sell to family members the same way you can sell to the general public. And for what it's worth, I'll point out that the mandate letters for the Minister of Finance and Agriculture included that commitment as well. And I certainly hope and will be cheering for our government to make good on those commitments. The other inequity that I see stems from the difference between creating favorable tax circumstances for someone to transfer a company to their kids, when if that same business was owned personally, like the inshore fishing operations I referred to, they won't necessarily benefit from those same advantages. So one of the things that the proposed bill does in the amendments to Section 84.1 of the Income Tax Act, which is essentially trying to restrict access in certain ways to the lifetime capital gains exemption. If you actually sell from your shares in a company to your child, who does not, you sell it to them personally, not to a company that they own, they have access to the lifetime capital gains exemption. So I'm curious if your view is that there would somehow be an opportunity through this through the measures included in your proposed bill that would actually give better access to the lifetime capital gains exemption than somebody might have if they sell it to their kid who might not own a company but would rather take the assets or shares personally.
I thank you again for that question as well. I think that one of the things that we looked at with this bill, I mean, there are the safeguards that I talked about earlier, Sean, in this bill for resale of it down the road. I think it's equitable to be able to make sure that the generation that we're selling it to, it is, the words qualified shares are right in the act, the bill that we've put forward here as well. And for individuals to be able to sell to their own families outside of those corporations is a choice that they've made, as I had to make back in the 70s when corporations weren't very, the structure of a corporation, I should say, wasn't even very, it was very new in those days. It was new legislation. In fact, it was legislation brought in by the present Prime Minister's father in those areas for agriculture to be into farming or corporations in those days. And there were benefits to being incorporated. And when you get to a certain size, that still is the case today. And that's why many, just because of already tax rules that are put in place. So I think that that what this has done is taken a look at all of the tax rules that are there today that are still relevant to whether you're selling it to an individual that's not a corporation, and evening out the playing field for those that have already made the decision to remove themselves, I guess, as an individual and put themselves into a corporation. Corporation sometimes has that annotation to it that there's, you know, a huge amount of wealth involved, when actually what's being done here is just managing the tax processes and the day-to-day cash flow of these operations so that they can stay afloat.
Yeah, and look, I've got no reservations about what type of a business association a person may choose for their structure. I mean, in very, very large businesses, you'll often have a corporate structure, but that's certainly not always the case. There's a lot of small family businesses that choose that structure. One of the themes that came up earlier with what I think it was maybe Mr. Frajskatos and subsequently Peter Julian that raised the issue around potential tax avoidance issues. One of the concerns that I see, and maybe this would not play out, maybe it will, but is there anything in the bill that would prevent a circumstance that where there's effectively an artificial transfer for tax reasons that's not a genuine intergenerational transfer? What I'm thinking of in this case would be a circumstance where person X transfers or has a child, and that child sets up a holding company just for the purpose of holding shares in the farming operation, when in fact that kid has no interest in taking over the family farm. Because the person knows that 20 years before they decide to retire from farming, they say, let's put it to reduce our tax burden in the holding company. I'm going to keep working on this. Eventually, we'll sell the shares. Do you think that there's the potential for abuse of someone transferring a small business, a farming operation, a fishing corporation to a holding company purely to avoid the tax burden rather than to genuinely affect a transfer to their children?
I think that's the safeguard that was built into it, Mr. Fraser, in regards to that. It's not just a deemed transfer. There needs to be a legitimate transfer of the funds in taking place in this, and not just the shares in regards to that for a holding company, as you're talking about. And so I think that when Mr. Caron brought this bill forward in the first place, that was his intention, and certainly mine too, to be able to make sure that these are legitimate transactions that stay in place for X number of years down the road, in this case 5, before, and if they're not, then the taxation reverse has to be paid. And I get that you're considering more years than that down the road, but we've just put 5 in the bill. And I think that when these things, when regulations are put in place around these types of bills, those things can be dealt with.
Yeah,
Okay,
I guess one.
On this subject, let's follow it up. Go ahead, Mr. Fraser.
Yeah, sure. And look, I don't mean to be too picky here. I used to work with a lot of tax lawyers, and what I sense they're going to do is they're going to advise everybody who owns one of these businesses, put this in your kid's name 5 years plus a day, and whether they intend to own it or not, transfer the assets there. You keep running your business, farming, whatever it may be. So I'm just not convinced the safeguard is going to actually achieve what it hopes to. I've got some reservations about whether it will really have that effect. In any event, I'm now just rambling with the thoughts that are on my mind, but I appreciate your testimony, Mr. Maguire, and thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both. I think Mr. Maguire answered that question previously. Then turning to you, Mr. Fast, followed by Ms. Koutrakis. And Ed, hold your mic up closer to your mouth there too, I remember.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I just want to clarify, Canadian businesses, small businesses are not tax cheats. The large majority of our small businesses are law-abiding businesses that try to do the very best to generate prosperity, not only for their families, but generate a public good. And, you know, I seldom find myself agreeing with Mr. Julian, but I am totally on board with his suggestion that for too many years, Canadian family-owned businesses have been penalized for being family-owned, and they're trying to transfer the accumulated value of those businesses to the next generation, and they can't do it on a level playing field. And Mr. Maguire, thanks for bringing this bill forward. This bill has been analyzed up and down and sideways. There's very little here left to be investigated. And you suggested, Larry, that you'd like to see this bill expedited. And I can give you one reason why I think you're right on that. The CFIB estimates that somewhere in the order of 240,000 small businesses are going to go under by the time COVID is done. These aren't businesses that are severely diminished. They will be gone forever. And we're talking about 1.2 million small businesses in Canada. That means 20% of them won't be around anymore. For the remaining ones, the very least we can do as a country and as legislators is to remove an unfair tax burden they carry vis-a-vis a transfer of these businesses to non-family members. So, Mr. Maguire, if you could just comment on the urgency of understanding what COVID-19 has done to small businesses in Canada and the opportunity we have to do something that will allow these small businesses not only to survive, but be able to be transferred to the next generation that can bring new energy and vigor to making these businesses a success.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fast. I see no irony in your question coming from a person by the name of Fast. The faster you can get this type of legislation into place, if I could put it that way, without any pun intended, the more of those small businesses that will stay in existence. Not just because of, you know, that was the case before COVID hit, but the comment from Federation of Independent Business Now is that if there's 250,000 of these businesses, 240-some thousand of these businesses that may not make it because of COVID, it could be a big help. All sides of the house are looking for ways to be able to help small businesses stay in place. The 1.1 million that I talked about earlier, you're right, 20% of them could disappear if those numbers were right. I think our job as politicians is to make sure we keep as many of them viable as we can. And if legislation like this will help do that, I think it's a benefit for not just the small businesses, but the 8 or 9 million people who they employ.
So do you see any merit in calling more witnesses to speak to this bill, or would you like to see this go to clause by clause?
Well, I would like to see it go to clause by clause. I get that there's other people, there's many people. I mean, if you wanted to have everybody come and speak to this bill that wants to, we wouldn't get it through till next Christmas. But, you know, because there's that many people who just want to be on the record to support it. And so I've done this through farm transfer counseling organizations and that sort of thing as well. Intergenerational coaches on this sorts of thing agree with this as well. So I think that there's a real need to be able to move it forward. If you could do it on clause by clause, there isn't a need to have. I understand that normally we do have witnesses come before committees for 1 or 2 meetings on private members' bills, but I wouldn't say that there's a need to, you know, do much more than that because this bill is anxiously being awaited by not only those 1.1 million businesses, but the 8 or 9 million employees that they employ.
Yeah. Earlier, Ms. Zarowitz mentioned that she had a concern that this legislation might mostly benefit wealthy small business owners. And I'd be interested to hear your response to that. Have you done any analysis as to who would actually benefit from this leveling of a playing field?
The 1.1 million businesses that are out there today. These are not, as I said in second reading, these are not wealthy, they're not huge businesses, put it that way. It's not the large businesses that this affects. They've already got a tax structure in Canada for businesses of a certain size. So when you're looking at these small businesses in particular, as I say, you know, I guess the goal of every small business is to be wealthy. But I think there's a definition involved in that involves some of the things that Mr. Julian asked me about and was asked by others, by Ted as well, in regards to success isn't always measured in the dollars that small business makes. It's measured in their community activities and the success of being able to bring their family members into that business, which I get Mr. Fraser's concerned about in regards to that. So am I. But I think that we need to do everything we can to facilitate the legitimate, which is like, I would say 99% of these small businesses would want to make sure that they are actually helping the next generation get into the business, keep it in business, and provide continuity in their local communities, right from the sporting events, the arts, and their whatever denomination they choose to for their religious freedom in the country. So I think that we've got an opportunity here to be able to help everyone through a bill like this.
Okay, thank you both for a little over there. I'm not sure, Ms. Koutrakis, if you still want in, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I cede my time to Mr. McLeod.
Okay, Mr. Michael McLeod, the floor is yours, and we will have time for one more after that. Before I go to you, Michael, I would say, if on the off chance we can get to clause by clause on March 9th, we have 2 panels of witnesses that day. I don't think we have heard from officials yet. But if on the off chance that we could get to clause by clause on that day, we would, the legislative clerk tells me we would need amendments, if there is any, to the clerk's office by Thursday, March 4th at 4 p.m. That's this week. So if anybody's thinking of amendments, then keep that in mind. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to thank our witness for appearing in front of us today on this bill. I come from the north, so we don't have a whole lot of farms. We have people that are interested in farming, and we have some small hobby type farms. But you know, this applies to more than just farms. We talked about the fishing industry and small businesses. I think some people have raised the issue about the concern and the rationale why legislation is the way it is. And I hear that the largest concern in adopting the proposed changes to section 81.1 84.1 could open the door to new tax avoidance opportunities. Would the witness like to comment on that? Is that something that he sees as a realistic, or that is just something that is not quite correct?
Well, thank you, Mr. McLeod. I will use the terminology that I've used before. I believe that 99% of these businesses are legitimate businesses who want to continue to work in their communities, such as yours in the north, in the territories as well. They're not tax cheats, as Mr. Fast referred to, the way they have been referred to by some in the House before. I think it was the Prime Minister in regards to that. And I think that, you know, as I said, the goal of some of these businesses would be to make sure that they are successful. And there's different terms of wealthy, I guess, in regards to, I'm assuming that they're referring to financially wealthy, when most of these small businesses are using the funds that the next generation will probably have to borrow to make the purchase of that business used for their retirement. And so I have no problem in being involved in small business myself as a farmer through most of my life, and watching those operating businesses around me. Is there ever a tax position in the country that someone isn't trying to find a way to get around? And a lot of tax structures are, you know, there's accountants that spend, and tax lawyers, I guess, that would spend volumes of time and effort to try and make sure that they're putting as many dollars as they can in their local people's pockets in regards to whether you're incorporated or not. So I would say that from an efficiency point of view and from a structure in Canada that helps provide, as I said earlier, the quality products that we are known for in Canada to export around the world, the freedom to be able to continue to have community development by leaving these dollars in those communities, and by being able to have the pride of ownership that many families really feel in a heartfelt manner, with tremendous pride that they are able to, number one, convince their next generation of individuals that the business that they're in is a great one for them to take over, and secondly, to be able to have them educated to be able to do that. And I think that that's a circumstance that we need to be quite proud of in this country, and always be cognizant of those who might try to skirt the types of structures that are set up, but this is being set up to make sure that we help small businesses and put them on an equitable field.
Thank you. I thought you were going to give me a yes or no answer about that, because you know, you made it clear that you don't think this is going to open the door to further tax avoidance opportunities. I do want to go back a little bit, and I haven't been following some of the history on this. And you mentioned that this is a private member's bill that you picked up, that somebody else had drafted, and you're carrying it forward. Can you tell me where the previous member went with this bill and what happened?
Mr. Caron brought the bill forward. Well, Mr. Caron brought the bill forward, and he brought it into reading in the House, and the government defeated the bill. The opposition completely voted for it at that time. There was even 10 Liberals voted for it, but in the majority Liberal government, the bill was defeated. And so that's the history of it. Quite correct, Mr. DeBrew, to bring in a bill earlier than that as a Liberal to deal with a similar situation for small businesses, but that never got passed because of an election interfering with that as well. So, and it was never brought forward again. So Mr. Caron did the very, I think, worthwhile exercise of doing a lot of, that's why I asked him to come into my office and debate, not to debate, to have a discussion on it, and pass the research that he had already done to me, so that I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, I guess, if you could say, in regards to being able to make sure that his goal of having small businesses supported in this manner and intergenerational transfers take place.
Okay, is there anybody else got a couple of quick questions? We got about 4 or 5 minutes left. I would say this, Mr. McLeod and Larry both. Guy Caron was on the Finance Committee for quite a number of years, and he is an extremely strong individual on research. And I've never seen him come forward with anything that he didn't know his stuff on. So that's a compliment to Mr. Caron. Does anybody have a quick question they want to ask? Annie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Maguire. And I think that what we've heard this afternoon is that definitely there needs to be more discussion, a really healthy debate. I think that, certainly there's a need for the federal government to facilitate the transfer of small businesses and the family farms and fishing corps between family members. However, I think that, and I know that many of us, my colleagues have talked about tax avoidance, and I think by raising that issue, in no way are we suggesting that small business owners or farmers or fishers are not honest. I'm just saying that, we need to go forward with extreme caution so that there aren't any unforeseen consequences and considerable tax avoidance opportunities. You mentioned several organizations have voiced support for this bill in your opening remarks. However, I'm concerned that these consultations did not fully explore the potential consequences of this bill with regard to opportunities for tax avoidance. Have you discussed this bill with any lawyers, academics, or other stakeholders who voiced concerns? And if they did voice concerns, can you speak to us a little bit about that? I know not to reinvent the wheel, and you had a great briefing, but I'm just curious to know if you yourself have had any conversations to that effect.
I have spoken with major accounting firms across Canada, and there's many of them that believe that this bill is very accurate and should be implemented immediately. And I have also want to just make the point that I know the Liberal government has said that they feel that this bill would be okay for agriculture. But if it's okay for agriculture, then what's wrong? If there's loopholes in it, then why wouldn't there be loopholes in the agriculture side as well? So I think that, taking one sector out when they're all to be treated the same, whether it's small business corporations that are that with share capital that would be allowed, as opposed to just segregating out agriculture, is not fair to small businesses across the country. And because there is no difference in the mannerisms that they would be dealt with through major legal counsels or accounting firms in this nation. A tax policy is a tax policy, and it should be set up for not just one sector or agriculture and fishers, but the small business community can have that. As I, now live in the city of Brandon, I know, as I referred earlier, there, no matter what city we live in, there's small businesses, and many of them are family-run operations.
Okay, last question to you, Pat. Mr. Kelly, where'd you go? There you are.
I've listened to all the comments, and when we hear comments, and of course, none of us want the tax system to become more complicated. I see this in an exercise making it less complicated by treating all sales the same. But this concern around people, these small businesses getting an advantage, or small business owners being able to take advantage or receive an advantage. I wanted to get just into the record the point about small businesses, that when we talk about selling a small business that a person has put their entire working life into and is retiring, the small business owner doesn't have a pension from their employer. They didn't have employer benefits throughout their working career. They weren't protected through their livelihood for all the protections that employees in the workforce have. It is a tough life being self-employed. And when a small business owner whose assets in the business are not likely to be liquid, They've accumulated in the, we've talked a lot about farms or fishing businesses. We're talking about equipment, land, these kinds of things, plant, all sorts of items that they want to transition to allow the business to keep going. It's not that this bill will give an advantage to small business owners. Would Mr. McGuire, would you agree that this bill will simply take away a disadvantage faced by small business owners?
Absolutely, it will, Mr. Kelly. And I think Mr. Julian made a very good point on that when he said we need to stop the penalty that they're presently faced with. And I think that's just the culmination of the whole bill. It's a level playing field, but it's not that it's even close right now. There's a huge penalty there, a big disincentive to sell it to your own family, and that needs to change.
Okay, we are going to have to end it there. We do have a meeting on Thursday with the law clerk. I'm not exactly sure how much time he's got first, but we will look to that, to the clerk of our committee. Thank you very much, Larry, and thank everyone for the discussion. This was a great discussion today. And with that, we'll have to adjourn. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, Larry. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.